Hi, this is Scott, Chino Basin Water Conservation District, and we're here today to talk about planting shrubs and trees in your home garden. This is a western redbud, Cercis occidentalis. It is one of my very favorite large shrubs, or easy to prune it into a small tree for the home garden. It's got beautiful spring flowers. It's got really nice green leaves throughout the year. And then once it's a large shrub, it gets a really nice kind of fall color and decay. It doesn't look like much now because we're in early December, but this is the perfect time to plant these things, late fall through the winter. And so they're gonna be ready to have a nice burst of growth in the spring. This is a 5-gallon plant. And when you're planting shrubs and trees at home, really smaller is generally better. 1-gallon plants actually are the best if you can find them. In 3 years' time, you generally won't be able to tell the difference between a 1-gallon and a 5-gallon. And over 5 years, you generally won't be able to see any difference between a 1-gallon, a 5-gallon, and a 15-gallon. However, we're putting this into our demonstration garden, and if we were to plant a 1-gallon redbud, it'd be about this big right now. So sometimes we'll go for the 5. If you're at home, you're trying to save some money, you have some time, absolutely, if you can find a 1-gallon plant, go for it. And so we have a few things to do before we plant what's going to be our kind of specimen small tree, large shrub to hold together the area. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how deep this is planted in the pot. Now, even plants from really good nurseries, sometimes they just get repotted from small plants to larger plants to larger plants. And oftentimes the plant will be just a little deeper than ideal in the nursery pot. And so what you want to do for most plants is find the very top roots or get close down to it. And so you can see as I'm going down, it's about here where we're starting to get to our first roots. And so we got a little bit of soil that we can take out of this, and we'll put it, just so it's not messing up the landscape around, we'll put it into this 1-gallon pot. And this is really important especially for all plants, but especially for California native plants and Mediterranean climate plants, low water plants, because low water plants don't just not need much water, generally they need good drainage, and their most sensitive part is the root crown, right where the branches meet the root. And if these are planted too deep, those areas can tend to accumulate water and hold more moisture than the plant really wants there, which can cause all sorts of health problems later on. And right here and right now, right before you plant, that's really the easiest time to address this. And so, as I'm gently working the soil out, I'm feeling with my fingers for fine roots, and you can see some right here. So you're getting to a layer from loose soil to where the root ball is kind of held together by the top fine layer of roots. And that's what we got here, but you can see how much soil we've taken out of this to really get to our proper planting height. So our next step is to recheck our hole and see if it's the right depth. We've already dug this hole. We filled this hole with water a couple of times to make sure that the soil around where we're gonna put this root ball is nice and wet, and we have a well-watered, kind of nice and heavy root ball on this tree. So we put this in, and we're looking like we are pretty close to the level that we want. But I really, especially with my specimen trees and shrubs that want good drainage, like to err on having the root ball a little bit high, like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch, to just really make sure that that root ball will never be down at the bottom of an area that's accumulating water. So we'll take some of our extra soil for the hole around this area, put it in. We have really rocky soil here, but a little bit of gravel is not bad for these plants. They grow in fairly gravelly areas, and helps make sure that our drainage is good. Check this again. That's looking more like what I want. So the next step is to slowly tease the root ball out of the pot and take a look at the roots. So we're getting this plant out of the pot, and this is really, we're in luck, a pretty perfect root ball. You can see a few of the roots just starting to get to the edge of the root ball, but not really a root bound plant with a ton of circling roots. And so what we're going to do is we still want to shave the roots of this plant, because we want to make sure that when the plant grows in, its roots are able to all go out as its kind of natural pattern was designed for, and be able to go far and wide to get access to water and nutrients in the soil. Because with how they're even starting to wrap around now, if we just stick this plant in the ground and let it grow, a lot of these roots that are starting to circle will continue to circle in the hole, and they'll kind of stay tight around the shrub over time. So to do that, you can use any serrated blade. I like to use my Hori Hori garden knife, sorry. And you can use any serrated blade, folding pruning saw, even a serrated blade from the kitchen, and you just want to take a nice thin layer, it's called shaving the root ball, all the way around, so that these roots, instead of being longer and starting to circle around, are now shorter. Point it out. That'll about do it. Check the top. It's easy to mix some of the circling roots if there are any at the top. We're looking pretty good here. And then the last step, check the bottom. And a lot of roots kind of accumulate at the bottom. Kind of tease this out just a little bit. We don't want these to end up in a big knot at the bottom of the hole. So shave these off. Now we are ready to plant. See, we lost a little bit of soil off the top and the back. That's just fine. We have a nice root ball. One last check of the depth. Make sure we don't lose too much depth. I'm going to put just a little bit more soil back in the bottom of this hole. Should probably do it. And so that looks perfect to me. And so when you're planting what's going to be a shrub or a specimen tree, you also want to look at form and how the plant is going to grow out over time. Even in this small size, we're going to want to do some pruning to set this small tree or large shrub upright for the right form. We're going to look at the area around and look at how the plant is naturally growing. And so what I'm going to want, and this is all just your aesthetic, whatever you think will look nice, is I'm actually going to take off most of the rest of these side branches and just bring this down to have this start as one nice branch that starts to fork off right here. It starts to branch just a little bit. It could be a natural form to leave most of this, but to me, just aesthetically, it's a little congested, and we're right outside of a building. It's not a kind of big, wide, naturalistic landscape. And then you can see that this one main branch that I'm going to leave, I can make those cuts now, actually. If you're making a lot of these cuts, it's better to do it when the tree is either dormant or semi-dormant, and this is fine, it's going into winter. Leave this one for now. Take this off. There we go, and I might do some additional pruning cuts later. I'll do this one now. Some more of this might be removed over time, but now we have what we're starting with, a much cleaner form. But we can see that it's kind of leaning a little bit, and there's going to be a main branch that's coming off that way. And so since we're close to the building here, I'm going to rotate this. Now it's coming kind of out into the landscape a little bit more and spreading out a bit, so the building will be a nice backdrop for it. And I think we are ready to plant. So now we're ready to plant, and when we dug the hole, we put our extra soil coming out of the hole into this 5-gallon bucket because we have a lot of other planting holes that we dug all around it, and it makes it nice and easy to fill the hole. You want to go pretty slowly, pack the soil in. Gravel is fine. We want to make sure that the soil is similar, or the same ideally, which this case will be, to all the soil that's around. And when we're working with native, Mediterranean, or drought-tolerant plants, we don't put any amendments, no compost, no fertilizer, no planting mix from the hardware store into the hole. And not only do we not need to, but these plants actually don't want that and will grow better without it. They're adapted to lean soils. If you have some gravel, that's fine. They're adapted to gravelly soils as well. And what they're not adapted to are soils with a lot of organic matter or soils with a high amount of nutrient. And so they actually grow best in these soils. And if you put a lot of organic matter, a lot of nutrients in the hull, fertilizer, next to the plant, the roots will kind of stay put and they won't spread out throughout the landscape to really search for that water and nutrients that we really want it to. And it's kind of, by not putting anything else into the soil, you're forcing those roots to spread out and you're training it to be a more resilient, more drought tolerant plant. I'm going to go get some more soil. I'll be right back. So, finishing filling up this hole. And then we're going to create a small watering basin around it to really make sure, some concrete we don't need in here, really make sure that we're watering in this plant. The first time this plant gets watered, which will be right now, is the most important watering this plant will ever get. You really need to make sure that all the soil around this plant is nice and evenly watered to get the plant off to a good start. Make sure there's no stress right as it's trying to get established. Put our extra soil out. And then, just using my hands, kind of form a little berm all the way around. And even though our root ball was nice and wet and the soil, the hole had been filled with water, our backfill soil was still kind of dry. We want to make sure that everything has a nice even level of moisture as the roots are encouraged to begin to spread out. Now, if you're going to be hose watering through the establishment period, through the first year, and that's just fine. You want to really make sure that you have a nice, well-constructed berm. I'm doing this pretty quick because we are going to be coming back very soon in the next couple of days and putting in a really nice, even system of irrigating. That's a drip irrigation grid, and we'll have another video about that. And so really, we're just keeping this mound here for our initial 1 or 2 waterings. So here we are, watering our red bud in. It's a nice slow stream. The hose end nozzle is really useful, something that has a nice shower or garden stream. Oh, and you can see something that you need to watch out for here, which was the low point of this was the thing that filled up and overflowed first. And so we're packing just a little bit more soil on and making sure that we can get a nice deep soak. And for the first watering in, I will fill up this watering basin. This is a relatively small one for the size because we're putting in other plants all the way around. If this was just one specimen plant without much crammed in around it, I'd make the watering basin a little bit wider. But I'm going to let this drain out and I'm going to come back and I'm going to fill it 2 more times, and that should really nicely saturate all that soil and make sure that everything is going to be off to a real nice start.